the president remains the symbol of unity and stability, and that the future of Yemen can only be decided through ballot box.
The government and official media denounces the protesters as anarchists, conspiring with Western powers to destabilize the country.
Yeah, I'd like to tell the world that Ali Abdullah Saleh is our father, the father of all Yemenis. We want peace. We don't want terrorism. We don't want a war, a civil war between Yemenis.
3 weeks since the start of the popular demands, attempts to broker a deal between the president and the opposition have failed. Saleh wants to stay in power till 2013. His opponents say that his mere presence is an obstacle to real change. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
And there's more discontent in Jordan, where thousands have taken to the streets of the capital, Amman. They're calling for political reforms and a constitutional monarchy. The new Prime Minister, Maruf al-Bakit, has so far rejected opposition calls to strip King Abdullah II of his powers. More protests have erupted in the wealthy Gulf Sultanate of Oman. In the northwestern town of Sohar, thousands of demonstrators took to the streets to demand greater political representation, an end to corruption and higher wages. It's believed that dozens have been killed in the past few weeks of unrest across the country. Well, tensions continue to escalate in the island kingdom of Bahrain. Thousands of anti-government protesters have surrounded state television's headquarters in the capital, Manama. It follows clashes between Sunni and the Shia majority who've been leading the demonstrations. Well, for more, I'm joined on the line by our correspondent in the capital. We're not naming him for his own safety, so bring us up to date with what's happening there at the moment.
Well, at the moment, people are still continuing to gather at the Pearl Roundabout, which the protesters over the last few weeks have renamed Martyrs Roundabout, in remembrance of 7 pro-democracy protesters shot dead last month. Today saw thousands gather outside 2 locations. One of them was the Ministry of Information building, where State TV is based, because they feel that their whole movement is being misrepresented by the state media. And they've also gathered outside the Foreign Ministry, marching to Pearl Roundabout, where hundreds of people have been camped out for many weeks now. And basically, they're demanding that there's a new interim government to replace the government, which consists largely of ministers nominated by the king here in Bahrain.
And tell me what the security situation has been like there this time round. Well,
you would have expected there to be a very visible security presence, given that there were those clashes that you were mentioning on late on Thursday in another part of Bahrain, but not too far from the capital. Those were involving young people who were largely Shiite protesters, anti-government protesters, clashing with nationals who were originally from other countries, and that seems to be their gripe, rather than the fact that they were pro or anti-government. The security forces, however, have largely stayed away from Pearl Roundabout, and as I speak, it's pretty much the festival atmosphere that there has been over the last few evenings. But that's not to say that there isn't tension. There's considerable tension, because one of the protesters' demands is that the government releases up to 200 political prisoners, which they claim are still being held, and they're also rather worried that the opposition parties are now accepting the idea of dialogue with the government. The protesters do not want any sort of talks unless the government guarantees that there will be a constitutional monarchy and fresh elections. Some say that the political parties might actually accept less than that, Lauren.
Well, thank you very much indeed to our correspondent that we're not naming there for his safety in Bahrain. Anti-government protests have been gaining momentum across Iraq too. Riot police used batons and water cannon to disperse demonstrators on the streets of Basra. Meanwhile, in the capital, Baghdad, hundreds converged on Tahrir Square for the 2nd Friday in a row. They're calling for improved services, better pay and an end to corruption. Many walked for miles to reach the protests after the authorities banned cars from entering the city centre. Our correspondent Jane Araf is there.
Thousands of people have walked for hours to come to this square. They're walking around the circle and ending up at the foot of this bridge where the riot police are. Now, these police are here to prevent protesters from going further, and they have taken the unprecedented step of putting concrete blocks at the foot of the bridge. This entire city overnight has been transformed into a fortress. The green zone sealed off, concrete placed around major buildings, and people told they can only walk. Despite that, thousands of people have come to chant that they believe that the government they elected are liars, and they demand better.
Jane Araf there. Supporters of Côte d'Ivoire's opposition leader have taken to the streets in response to the shooting of peaceful protesters on Thursday. Young men, some armed with knives, set up roadblocks in Abobo after troops loyal to President Laurent Gbagbo shot dead 6 female anti-government demonstrators. The UN admits the organisation is overstretched, but says Côte d'Ivoire must be given as much attention as Libya.
We don't want any differentiation in the treatment of those crises. That's the same thing. That's the same civilians who are killed, be it in Libya and Côte d'Ivoire. Maybe the magnitude is more in Libya, but that's the same thing. They are using war weapons to kill peaceful civilians. So that should be addressed, and that's the responsibility of the international community to protect the civilian.
Politicians in Taiwan say they feel threatened by China's plan to boost defence spending by 13%. Beijing played down the island nation's concerns, but Taiwan is urging the United States and Europe to sell them more weapons to develop their own arsenal. China says this year's defence budget will total 600 billion yuan. That's $91.5 billion US dollars.
There is the development of stealth fighters, continuous production of submarines, plus the nuclear-capable submarines, and the making of aircraft carriers. They are likely to have the first aircraft carrier made in the next few years. Then they will make more.
Gary Lee is a research assistant for Chinese defence and diplomacy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. He says China's military budget hike isn't as big as it seems.
I think we need to take things into perspective here. I think the 12.7 increase is actually more or less the standard rate of increase China has adopted since 2000. The only difference is that last year, during the economic recession, where China was really feeling the bite, they decided to lower the increase to 10%. So this is really getting back to a normal kind of level of development for the PLA. I do believe that there will be other elements in the Chinese budget that ought to be included in the published budget. But then having said that, many militaries have also side budgets as well for military R&D or civilian integrated technologies. So it's not just China who has this so-called secret budget. But even having said that, even though if you factor in this alleged 1/3 or 1/2 more budget than they actually declared, China's budget is still significantly lower than many Western nations, and especially the United States.
A bomb has exploded in a mosque packed for Friday prayers in northwest Pakistan. 9 people were killed after the bomb was detonated in Peshawar province. 30 others were wounded, and officials